They kicked me out. They blamed me for everything, but I still saved my sister. The story you're about to hear is 100% true, once published by major outlets, like the New York Times People magazine, and it shook America in the early 2000s. A black teenager was kicked out of his own home. He was accused of committing the most horrifying act imaginable within a family, and yet he was the one who ended up saving his little sister. Saving the truth. Think you've heard every tragic family story there is not even close, because no other story has ever been investigated and reconstructed this thoroughly. I spent months verifying every detail to retell every heartbreaking moment, exactly as it happened. To the outside world, the Blake family looked like the perfect model, the father a successful businessman, the mother a prestigious music teacher, and Scarlett, the beautiful, brilliant younger daughter who always came first in every competition. No one ever noticed the quiet shadow behind them. Jordan, the eldest son, 17 years old, with dark brown skin, somber eyes, and a smile that had learned how to disappear. From a young age, Jordan understood he didn't fit into that perfect family portrait. In every photo on the wall, he stood off to the side. At every dinner, Scarlett was served the best bites. Jordan was told, "Don't eat so much." Boys shouldn't be greedy. Scarlett's birthdays were sparkling events, cake lights, gifts piling up on the table. Jordan's birthdays, his mom would usually say, "This month's a bit tight, maybe next time." Scarlett was the embodiment of everything their parents hoped for. Jordan was the lingering memory of an unnamed mistake. Still, he tried obedient top of his class, quietly loving. But in that seemingly perfect house, no one ever really saw that he was there. Jordan once asked his father, "Why don't you keep your hair curly like mine?" His father looked at him and gave a faint smile. "Your hair, it's hard to manage." From a young age, Jordan had grown used to words that weren't shouted but still cut like a knife. Though his father was black, he always kept a distance from the black part of himself. He preferred things that were polished proper, closer to success like Scarlett. But Jordan, with his deep brown skin and full lips that looked exactly like his paternal grandmother's, was something his father tried to hide. His mother didn't bother hiding it. She once said to Jordan bluntly, "Your skin's too dark to blend in. In this society, you'll have to work 3 times as hard just to be seen as half." That wasn't advice, it was a sentence. Scarlett, on the other hand, was called a strong young lady, angelic and graceful. Wherever she went, she was cherished. Jordan, meanwhile, learned to walk softly, speak gently, and make himself small. The favoritism wasn't a momentary lapse. It was a crack planted daily, and now it was growing into a chasm. It was a sweltering June night. Jordan was lying in his room, arm over his forehead, listening to the steady hum of the air conditioner, when he heard screaming downstairs. His mother's voice rang out first, shrill, panicked, then his father's low and furious, and finally, Scarlett's crying. Jordan stepped out of his room. The moment he reached the bottom of the stairs, his father stormed over, grabbed him by the collar, and yanked him into the living room. "What did you do to her?" he roared, eyes bulging, veins red with fury. Jordan didn't even have time to process what was happening before his mother hurled something at him, a pregnancy test. 2 glaring red lines. Scarlett had collapsed into a chair, covering her face. She said nothing. "It was you, wasn't it?" his mother screamed. "Only someone as sick as you would do something like this." Jordan was in shock. He stammered, "I didn't do anything. I swear." But his swearing only enraged his father more. He raised his hand and slapped Jordan so hard he crashed to the floor. "You seduced your own sister. You're the disgrace of this family." Scarlett still said nothing. She didn't deny it. She didn't confirm it. She just cried. That very night, Jordan was thrown out of the house. No luggage, no money, just an old cell phone and a worn-out jacket. His mother opened the door, pointed to the street, and said, "Get out, and don't come back." Rain began to pour. Every step Jordan took felt like it weighed a ton. His eyes burned, not from the rain, but from the most painful part of it all, Scarlett's last look. She looked at him, then turned away. Jordan wasn't just kicked out of his home. He was cast into the darkest pit of betrayal. He didn't just lose a roof over his head. He lost the truth. He lost the last shred of trust he had in the people he once called family. That night, a 17-year-old child officially became homeless, branded with a crime he never committed. And he had no idea. This was only the beginning of what was about to explode. 2 nights. 2 long, dragging nights passed in the freezing cold and crushing loneliness of a city that never sleeps. Jordan slept, curled up on a park bench, using his backpack as a pillow. His stomach ached with hunger, his jacket soaked through from the rain. He didn't dare call anyone. No relatives, no friends. Everyone was a potential threat, especially when even his own family had turned their backs on him. But then, as he stumbled past the gate of his old middle school just after sunrise, a name suddenly lit up in his mind. Ms. Rivera. She had been his literature teacher in 8th grade, the only adult who had ever looked at Jordan without pity or suspicion. She once kept him after class just to say, "Jordan, you're a writer with a soul. You deserve a better family." Jordan didn't know how he found the strength, but he walked nearly 7 kilometers to the small home she once mentioned, the one she shared with 2 elderly cats. Standing in front of her door, his legs trembled. Twice he lifted his hand to knock and pulled back. On the 3rd try, the door opened. There she was, Ms. Rivera, hair tousled, wearing a nightgown and a thick cardigan. Her eyes flickered with confusion for a moment, then froze. "Jordan," she whispered, and without hesitation she opened her arms and pulled him in. Jordan broke down, sobbing like a child. No rapid-fire questions, no suspicious stares. She said only one thing as she closed the door and guided him inside. "You're here. And from now on, this is your home." She made a pot of hot chicken soup, quietly draped a towel over his shoulders, and let him talk. Talk about everything: the pregnancy test, Scarlett, turning away the stinging slap from the father who never truly saw him as a son. When Jordan choked out, "They don't want me anymore," she placed a hand over his chest and said gently, "But the world still needs you, and so do I." In that moment, with a bowl of soup and a threadbare blanket, Jordan knew he hadn't lost everything. Because sometimes the people who don't share your blood are the ones who truly become your family. A week had passed since Jordan moved in with Ms. Rivera, and he still hadn't slept through a single night. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw it all again. His father's slap, the door clicking shut behind him, and Scarlett turning away, saying nothing. But that night, his phone buzzed. The screen flashed a name, Scarlett. Jordan froze. Should he answer? After what she did to him, she had thrown him into the pit, destroyed his name, shattered his spirit. But a part of him, the part that still remembered being her brother, couldn't ignore it. He swiped his finger. "Hello." On the other end, only frantic breathing. "Jordan." Scarlett's voice trembled. "I'm sorry." Jordan clenched the phone. "It's too late, Scarlett. Way too late. I know. I deserve that. But I need to tell you the truth." Silence settled in. Then Scarlett began to speak, each word slicing through Jordan's heart like a blade. The one who got Scarlett pregnant wasn't Jordan. It wasn't some reckless teenage mistake either. It was Blake Harrison, the son of their parents' biggest business partner. A wealthy, popular young man constantly praised in the media as the next generation of leadership. Scarlett said it happened during a dinner party hosted by their parents. Blake spiked her drink, and when she was dazed, barely conscious, it happened. I couldn't tell anyone. I was scared. If I said something, Dad would lose the deal. Mom would lose her mind. They'd blame me. And then when Scarlett started showing signs of pregnancy, their mother found out. They interrogated her. They pressed for answers. And when Scarlett wouldn't name names, their parents chose a scapegoat Jordan. The unimportant child. The perfect excuse. Because who would believe the word of a dark-skinned, quiet boy with no one to defend him? I didn't fight back. I let them blame you. I was a coward. I'm sorry, Jordan. I don't deserve to be your sister. Jordan sat in stunned silence. The pain didn't explode like he thought it would. It was quiet. Slow. But it rooted itself deeper than ever before. So why are you calling me now? Scarlett took a deep breath. Because I can't live with this secret anymore. I don't want to stay there. If I leave, would you help me? Jordan paused. He didn't know what the answer was. He was living off the kindness of Ms. Rivera. He had nothing. But then he looked up. At a painting Ms. Rivera had hung on the wall. It showed a tiny bird spreading its wings in the middle of a storm. And Jordan softly said, "Yes. If you're telling the truth, then yes. But this time, Scarlett, you have to stand on the side of it." On the other end, Scarlett broke down in tears. And for the first time in that river of sobs, Jordan heard the voice of a real person. Not a pampered golden child, but a young girl, trying to escape the polished hell her family built around her. "Do you really want to expose your parents?" Ms. Rivera asked, after Jordan recounted the entire phone call with Scarlett. Jordan stayed silent. He didn't answer right away, but something in his eyes had changed. No more pain. No more self-pity. Just calm and a cold, unwavering resolve. "It's not about revenge," he said slowly. "But if I don't do this, no one will save Scarlett. Or the baby." Ms. Rivera sat up straight. "Then where do we start?" From that moment on, they became a team. Ms. Rivera reached out to an old friend, a human rights attorney named Camille Tran. She had worked with many underage assault survivors. After hearing the story, she said, "Just one thing. We need evidence. And fast." Jordan got to work. Scarlett secretly sent him a voice recording from the night their parents forced her to take the blame for Blake. In it, their mother's voice was clear. "If you don't stay quiet, everything your father built will come crashing down. Do you want to destroy this family?" Scarlett had also saved messages from Blake texts, in which he told her to get an abortion and shut up before things get messier. Piece by piece, the puzzle came together, each detail like a final brushstroke in a painting that had been buried for far too long. Jordan handed all the evidence to Camille, and in a meeting with representatives from Child Protective Services, she declared, "We not only have proof of statutory assault, we also have grounds to file charges against both the Blake and Scarlett families for conspiracy and cover-up." Meanwhile, Scarlett quietly left home and was taken to a safe shelter for pregnant minors. For the first time in years, she wrote a letter to legally revoke her parents' guardianship. "I no longer trust them," she wrote, "and I don't want my child to grow up in the same toxic environment I did." Jordan kept a copy of that letter, not as a weapon, but as proof that Scarlett had finally chosen to stand on the side of truth. One evening, as the two siblings sat at Ms. Rivera's kitchen table, Scarlett gently reached for Jordan's hand. "If I can't raise this baby," she hesitated, "could you take my place?" Jordan looked at his sister for a long time. In her eyes, there was no trace of the pampered girl she used to be, only a young mother scared, but full of hope. And he said, "I won't let this child grow up alone. I know what that feels like, and I won't let it happen again." The next day, under Camille's guidance, Jordan, just 17 years old, officially filed for legal guardianship of the unborn child. This wasn't a rash decision. It was the result of a journey through pain, awakening, and growth. None of them knew what lay ahead, but Jordan knew one thing for sure. This time he wasn't returning as the kid who got kicked out. He was returning as someone who stood for justice, for truth, and for a life not yet given the chance to cry. Because some battles aren't fought for revenge, but to protect the last good thing still worth saving. When the parents received notice from Camille Tran's law office, they didn't call Jordan. They didn't ask a single question, and they certainly didn't apologize. Instead, they immediately hired a high-profile attorney, someone known for defending major corporations during PR disasters. 3 days later, Jordan received an email from the opposing counsel. We have ample evidence that our clients, Mr. and Mrs. Blake, are not involved in any wrongdoing. All accusations are defamatory, fabricated, and severely damaging to their reputation. Ms. Rivera read the email, then slowly set her phone down. They're not planning to apologize, she whispered. They're planning to bury the truth. That afternoon, Jordan and attorney Camille attended a court-mandated preliminary mediation session, not to settle, but to formally state their position. In a sterile, cold-lit room, Jordan came face to face with his parents for the first time since the night he was kicked out. His father wore a tailored suit, his eyes sharp as blades, his voice eerily calm. We didn't do anything wrong. He made it all up to get back at us for throwing him out. Jordan stared directly at him, unblinking. I'm not getting back at anyone. I'm just telling the truth. His mother snapped, her voice rising. The truth is, you're using her to destroy this family, aren't you? You knew your father's being nominated to the city council. You're jealous, Jordan responded slowly, his tone steady, razor sharp. I don't need to be jealous of a reputation built on silence and lies. Their lawyer slammed a hand on the table. We demand that Jordan immediately cease all defamation and remove any materials that damage our client's image. Otherwise, we will countersue for defamation with damages up to $500,000. Jordan didn't flinch. He simply turned to Scarlett, sitting quietly across the table, silent until now. Are you ready? He asked. Scarlett took a deep breath, placed her hand on the table, and pulled out a document. A copy of the letter she wrote herself, a formal accusation against her own parents for psychological abuse, coercion, and the concealment of a statutory assault. The room thickened with silence. Their father shot up from his chair. What the hell are you doing? Scarlett, have you lost your mind? No, Scarlett said, her voice trembling but clear. I'm finally saving myself, and the baby growing inside me. Their mother stood too. Her face flushed red. I'm your mother. You owe me your silence. Scarlett broke into sobs. You were never my mother. Not really. Since the moment I could speak, you taught me how to hide everything. Not out of love, but because you were terrified someone might see how awful you really are. Their father turned to Jordan, his face twisted with fury. You're dragging this whole family to hell, Jordan. Jordan rose to his feet. He looked directly into the eyes of the man who used to be his role model and said, No, you pushed us into hell long ago. I'm just turning on the lights so the world can see who the real devil in the dark is. Attorney Camille nodded to the court representative. Your Honor, we will be forwarding all evidence to Child Protective Services and formally requesting a restraining order between Mr. and Mrs. Blake and both minors involved. Everyone stood. Everyone except Scarlett. She turned to look at her parents one last time. I'm not your obedient little doll anymore. I'm a mother now, and I won't let anyone hurt my child the way you hurt me. Out in the hallway, Scarlett clutched Jordan's hand, shaking with sobs. He tightened his grip, saying nothing, but his eyes were already filled with tears. In that moment, two children once cast aside by the very people who gave them life, chose to stand by each other, not as victims, but as survivors, and as the ones who finally broke the toxic cycle once called family. The courtroom wasn't packed that day, but the air felt as heavy as stone. Cold chairs, harsh white lights, and the faint, musty smell of old wood. Jordan sat beside Attorney Camille, his hands clasped so tightly they'd gone white. Across the aisle, his parents, Mr. and Mrs. Blake, sat silent, as statues, their eyes seething with hostility. Scarlett sat in the middle in the neutral witness seat. Her hand trembled slightly as it rested on her belly, now visibly rounded. She was nearly 7 months along. The judge entered a sharp-eyed woman with warm brown skin and a calm, commanding presence. She looked directly at Jordan. "You're still under 18. Why do you believe you have the capacity and responsibility to raise a newborn?" Jordan stood. His voice wasn't loud, but it was solid as stone. "Because I know what it feels like to grow up without love. And I won't let that happen to my niece." The steady clatter of the court stenographer's keyboard echoed in the silence, but no one moved. The air seemed frozen. "You have no home, no income. You're living off the goodwill of someone who isn't even related to you," the opposing counsel snapped, standing abruptly. "Exactly," Ms. Rivera said as she stepped up to the witness stand. "I'm the one who took Jordan in the night his biological parents abandoned him. I may not share blood with him, but I see him as family. And I will stand by his side every step of the way if this court grants him guardianship of the child." The judge nodded, signaling that Scarlett could speak. Scarlett took a deep breath and stood eyes fixed on her parents. "I can't trust either of you. You chose reputation over truth. When I cried for help, Mom called me a disgrace. When I stayed silent, Dad said I was a burden to manage. But Jordan," she turned to her brother, "Jordan was the only one who held me when I cried, the only one who asked me, 'Are you okay?' Not, 'How badly did you shame the family?'" "Who do you want to raise your child?" the judge asked. Scarlett stared straight ahead, unblinking. "Jordan. No matter his age or his situation, he's the only one who's ever loved me, and this baby without conditions." A stifled gasp came from the benches behind. Their mother. She clutched her husband's arm, her eyes shattered. The father stood abruptly, his voice shaking with rage. "This is insane. He's my son, a useless, worthless piece of trash, and now he wants to raise his own sister's child. That's disgusting." The judge slammed her gavel down. "Sit down, Mr. Blake. One more outburst like that, and I will have security escort you from this courtroom." Silence. The judge leaned back in her chair, quiet for a moment, then spoke slowly but firmly. "I've reviewed the case files, listened to testimony, and evaluated the capacity of all parties involved. I also believe that family is not defined solely by blood, but by the presence of true, unconditional love." She turned to Jordan. "Mr. Blake, this court grants you legal guardianship of the unborn child, on the condition that Ms. Rivera will serve as co-guardian until you reach legal adulthood." Jordan shot to his feet. His eyes welled with tears, but he couldn't find the words. Scarlett collapsed into his shoulder, sobbing uncontrollably. Their parents sat motionless, defeated. Not just in a courtroom, but in the hearts of the very children they had forgotten. Jordan wrapped his arm around Scarlett and whispered, "We're going to be okay. All 3 of us, I promise. No blood ties, no titles. Just hearts that choose to love, and that alone is what makes a family." The baby girl was named Amira, an Arabic word meaning princess. Scarlett chose the name, and Jordan nodded in agreement without a second thought, not because it sounded regal, but because from the moment Amira was born, She truly became the light that chased away the darkness of their past. Jordan had just started his freshman year of college. He worked part-time at the library, stayed up late, changing diapers, making bottles. There were nights he was so exhausted he fell asleep beside the crib. But when he saw Amira smile in her sleep, tiny hands reaching for warmth, Jordan knew he wasn't tired. He was alive. Scarlett began intensive therapy. After every session, she'd sit for hours watching Amira sleep. "I'm not ready to be a mom," she once said, "but I want to be someone she can be proud of." Ms. Rivera never called herself a guardian. She simply introduced herself as Grandma, and no one in the house argued. She taught Amira classical music, read her poetry, and told bedtime stories every night in a voice so gentle it never once ran out of love. No one mentioned the old parents anymore. There was no need. They were no longer part of this story. 3 people, 3 scars, 3 heartbreaks. Now learning how to piece themselves into a family. No shared blood, just one shared promise. Love without condition. And for them, that was enough. More than enough. Jordan no longer looked back to resent the past. He looked back to remind himself how far he'd come. From a boy cast out into the rain at night, to a brother, a self-made father, and a college freshman who always carried baby formula in his backpack. Scarlett was still on her healing journey. Each wound was a memory that hadn't yet found words. But every day, as she watched Amira grow, she was learning how to love herself the way she once wished her mother would. And Ms. Rivera, a woman with no blood ties to the Blake name, became their strongest foundation. She taught them that family is where your heart is accepted, not where you must bow your head just to survive. They didn't get to choose where they were born, but they chose where they belonged. And if you, the one reading this, have ever been made to feel like a burden, remember this. Maybe they feared you, because you carry a light they couldn't understand. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means moving forward without dragging the chains behind you. You are not alone. You're just on your way, back to yourself.